Welcome back to SDP My special guest today is a writer, a political thinker, a former Downing Street Chief of Staff, MP for West Suffolk, and Aston Villa fan, Nick Timothy.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Welcome. Good. I can't believe it's taken me so long to get you across the table, actually, but it's good that you're here, finally.
Well, it's great to be here.
Now, I'd like to talk about the very big things, the real big challenges for the country, if we can. And so at present, I would say Britain can't control its borders or balance its trade without debt. It can't balance its budget without debt. It can't build enough homes. It can't produce abundant energy at the right price. And it can't unite its people. So that's it. Now, the Americans, the Trump-Vance administration, has just published a new security report, and it's timely. And their view of us and the rest of Europe is that this is absolutely civilizational. Do you think they've got a point?
Well, they do have a point. I mean, I would add to your list, we've got a state that can't get anything done as well. So actually the mission for any political party that's trying to take the challenges of the country seriously, I think is three revolutions all at once. So it's completely reforming our economic model. It's trying to find a way of restoring our sort of shared national identity, our cultural coherence. And it's completely transforming the state so that we're actually able to make change happen. And it's difficult to imagine a time in the past where three enormous changes like that have been necessary all at once. But that is the challenge before us. And, as the Americans are saying, I think if you step back and look at Europe, certainly compare it to America. I'm not saying America doesn't have its problems, but if you look at things like the rate of growth over the last quarter of a century, the prosperity and strength of America compared to Europe, you understand why Americans look at Europe and think, well, it's a museum. It's a kind of tribute to the past and its former glory, but where's its future?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And from a citizen's point of view, it's immensely frustrating that you now have the worst of all worlds, really. You have a very large state in terms of expenditure, and taxation. Huge state, but which is quite inept. So let's start there then. Your sort of theory of the state, you outlined a lot of your thinking in this book that you wrote a few years ago, Remaking One Nation, which I'd recommend. What's your theory? Because I think particularly the liberals, the economic liberals, have just got this completely wrong. I think citizens require and want a state that actually has competence and capacity to do things. And I would start with things. Let's start with housing. I diagnose the housing crisis as the private sector's built 200,000 homes or thereby since the war. It's never really changed. 230 in a good year, 270 in a bad year. The state used to build that. And now that's been taken off the table. Effectively, state capacity in house building has been removed. And I liken it to a bird that's trying to fly. One of its wings has been hacked off, and we wonder why it can't fly. And you combine that with mass immigration, because most of it on the demand side, on the housing needs side, most of it is driven by that. And you're in a perfect storm. So would you agree that the state has just failed to do part of its job on housing?
Well, the broader point is that ideological attempts to reduce the size of the state quite often lead to a much bigger state because an incompetent state leads to social and economic problems, and then you end up having to redistribute and compensate and
mop up the blood.
And you end up tackling and chasing the symptoms of failure rather than building the state capacity to fix things in the first place. And I think that's where we are. I mean, housing is a good example where actually there's truth on both sides of the argument, right? So the state has built houses in the post-war period, builds very few now. In the pre-war period, actually, this country built loads of houses. And
Metro land.
And a lot of that was mostly private sector driven, but it was obviously before the Planning Act of the Attlee government. So to build the kinds of numbers of houses we need, we probably need to do both. So we do need planning reform.
I totally agree.
And we do need the state to play its part. But I do think housing is an exemplar of the kind of thing we're talking about. So firstly, it's connected to other policy failures. So 89% of the gap between the housing we have and the housing we need is caused by mass immigration. Nobody wanted it. Successive governments gave it nonetheless. But also, state policy has created scarcity. We have too few homes. And then the policy answer is to go into subsidizing the cost to try to support people with the very lowest incomes at the expense of people with medium incomes. And the answer isn't actually to do that. The answer really is to end the scarcity.
Yeah, that's true, and it's exasperating. It's a perfect example, I think, of of these things coming together, all of these coming together, and unintended consequences. And so now, if I'm correct, I think we spend about 36 billion on housing benefit, which is the state paying people's rents. That's what it's doing. Now, actually, ideologically, you could question whether it should be doing that at all, right? We spend about 8 billion largely through housing associations to build houses. And that should be the other way around, at the very least the other way around. And I think one of we in the SDP, we always talk a lot about cultural causes for virtually all our problems, economic and social. Virtually all of it's cultural. And I think it's a classic example of, would you agree that it's a classic example of sort of high time preference and just instant gratification? This year, we just shove a bit of money on debt, on paying people's rents. Tomorrow will look after itself, but it won't, will it? It's got to be quite a hard shift from one to the other. Start investing in actual stock.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would necessarily call it instant gratification. I think it's probably more that the extent of our problems is so deep and so complex and so interlinked that actually it's very difficult for lots of policymakers, whether that's politicians or civil servants or even the more informed commentators or thinkers or whatever, to truly grasp the scale of the change that we need. So people then, I think, focus on what's possible to do in the near future, which is often redistributing within a failing system or subsidizing something that you've just almost killed, rather than trying to break out. And one of the reasons we get on so well, I think, is because we're very interested in how we change the economic model. And in your intro, you talked about trade, which I think is at the heart of all of it.
All of it, yeah. Yeah, no, it is, but I use it as an example because it's one of the perfect examples of once you get into a problem of housing being too expensive for your population, you can't, and it's exasperating. We're sitting in SW1 and all these think tanks constantly produce these reports, all of them, and they always attack planning, and my background is in urban planning, and I know a little bit about it, and I was a developer for many years, built a few hundred homes. I honestly, take it from me, the problem is the supply. You've got to get the supply, you've got to build more housing, and you won't do that without state involvement. And it is exasperating. You can tax planning gain. You could do it actually without putting general taxation up a lot. One of the interesting things culturally, I find another thing that I find exasperating is this, what I call an omerta on mentioning immigration. So every time the BBC do a long piece on, I've listened to so many, I've listened to the Today program, or they had a two-hour special program on analysis of housing a couple of years ago. They mentioned immigration for 45 seconds. It's as if, literally, Nick, it's as if, you can import net 750,000 people and then just live in thin air. It's just ludicrous. Let's talk about trade, because that's another thing which is absolutely vital. So I just go straight for it. I think we've got a massive, like the Americans, we have a massive trade problem. And how would you characterize it? Because obviously, we could go back to Chamberlain, because you wrote a book on it. I mean, it's nothing new, is it? The idea of protection in the national interest isn't new, is it?
Well, shall we start with explaining the issue? Because I think sometimes this is portrayed, I think, as an anachronistic debate, as though we've moved beyond these kinds of questions.
These silly things.
But actually, so we've run a massive trade deficit outside the pandemic every year since 1998.
Yeah.
And the trade deficit is a symptom and a cause of the problem. So it's a symptom because we're not making and doing or selling enough of what the world needs, or actually what we ourselves need. And it's a cause because if you run a big trade deficit, you get a current account deficit. And what is supposed then to happen in economic theory is the value of your currency falls, everyone feels a bit poorer because imports become more expensive, but your goods and services become more competitively priced, and things kind of balance out. But we don't really do that because we're in denial about how we're actually poorer than we think we are.
Yeah.
And so we've become hooked on what we euphemistically call foreign investment. And some of that investment is welcome and it's good, and it's and it will improve productivity and keep people in good work. Lots of it is not really investment at all. It's extraction.
It is.
And this touches on all sorts of different things, from, university tuition fees and immigration to when people say, how on earth have we allowed Thames Water or the utilities become what they are? As well, we sold them to foreign private equity companies who have just extracted all the value.
That's what they do.
And we're incentivized to do all those things because we're addicted to foreign cash to make up for the fact that we're not trading enough, and we're not making and doing enough, selling enough of what the world needs. And so we quite often, I think people accept that with the public spending deficit, we're surviving today at the expense of tomorrow. But actually, the trade deficit is exactly the same. We're genuinely jeopardizing the prosperity and the security of our children, so we can get through the next week. But
it is cultural. It's partly theoretical, because I just think, post Thatcher particularly, I suppose, and some economic theories of the new right in the 70s, we were encouraged to think it doesn't matter. And the word I always use is indifference. They become indifferent to what is made where and by whom, and to who owns what. And the who owns what is the result of running trade deficits. You can't balance your trade unless you issue debt. If you don't export enough, you issue debt or you sell your assets. And people always forget that if you sell assets, of course, the milking of those assets, the revenues from those assets continues. So you continue exporting cash, really. It's literally insane. But tell me, you're in Parliament. How many... Because I debate this stuff and I try and sort of rattle a cage for a sort of an economic nationalism that Trump and Vance would recognise. And actually, the Spectator have had me on a few times defending Trump's position in protection. I think I wouldn't do it that way, but in principle, I think there's nothing wrong with it. But how many people in Parliament actually get it? How many of your colleagues in Parliament, all parties, understand the basics of trade economics?
Well, I obviously can't speak for all 600 odd MPs. I don't know lots of them. I obviously spend lots of time talking to the Conservatives, and actually, I think we're a small but perfectly formed bunch after the election. And what happens when you lose an election is obviously you have to confront the reasons why you've lost, and you need to also, I think, address how the world changed in the years you were in office, because I think that's sometimes why governments lose. The world around them changes, and they become slower in reacting. So I think there is genuinely an intellectual curiosity and a hunger to understand, what's happened. And there are far more people talking about, trade as the sort of centerpiece of the understanding of the failure of our economic model, certainly than there was 5 years ago. So I think it's becoming...
There's a vibe shift in this.
Yeah, and I think that, look, I think people respond to President Trump in different ways. He's changed the way people talk about this, right? And he's been prepared to address the what had been the elephant in the room with China. And the Europeans have reacted, and they talk much more about trying to protect the sovereignty of Europe through an improvement in its performance in world trade, and we now have responsibility for our own trade policy thanks to Brexit. So it is incumbent on politicians to address these issues and to work out what they think about the choices. And I think people are starting to grapple with it.
What slightly worries me in this country is that people imagine that Trump was elected and it came from nowhere. Actually, Biden was quite a protectionist in some ways, and there is that tradition in the Democrats as well. But it came out of an intellectual wellspring in the universities. I mean, some trade economists, Danny Roderick and Lighthizer, who wasn't really an academic in that sense, but it didn't come from nowhere. There was a hinterland, the unions, the car makers union, everyone's talking about this. And then it gets into policy. And what worries me about Britain is that there are very few people that advocate and talk about the protectionist side. I mean, very, very, very few. And I think that will mean, I worry that we're just going to be behind the curve on it. Maybe to use an example, I wrote down Chinese EVs. We don't, Chinese electric vehicles, to put it crudely, the Chinese, they will take all of that. They have a price advantage of about a third, and the public are not in a position to be preferential. Household budgets probably don't allow them to. So if you sit there like a lemon and watch, they'll have the lot. You won't have a car industry. And I've tried to explain this. And then your ideology isn't much use after you don't have a car industry. You're from the West Midlands, look at it. And we just seem very slow. Do you agree?
Yeah, and look, I think this touches on pretty much every aspect of policy as well. So it is obviously a strategic aim of the Chinese state to radically weaken or destroy Western productive capacity, and we've walked straight into the trap.
Yeah, because
international trade theorists will say, who cares? Who cares where things are made? If they're cheaper, that's good for your consumers, and your consumers will have greater spending power to spend on other things, and that's an opportunity for our producers. But to be a consumer, you have to be a producer.
Yes, and it beggars the town.
All debt.
It beggars the town. I try to explain. There's lots of ways I try and explain trade economics to people in the pub, whatever. Sometimes the Orkney Island example: 3 Orkney Islands, eggs, butter and lamb, and they trade, and it balances the day. And then one of the Orkney Islands starts a brewery, and then the other islands mortgage their houses to pay for the beer, and you're just knackered, and they own you. I mean, it's so important to grasp this. They will own you. And it depends what, yes, you've got the goods, and there are lots of free trade purists that just don't seem to understand. It's really scary.
There's a book on this subject that I think would be well worth listeners looking up, which is called Trade Wars Are Class Wars, by Michael Pettis, who I think he's played quite an important part in trying to change the way we think about these things, because who are the losers of the decline in Western productive capacity? It's the Western working class.
Yeah, and I think it is a betrayal. I mean, other people have written about it. Chris Lash in the States talking about the executives of the firms that offshored their production to Southeast Asia being tourists in their own country, and I think they were. I think it was not patriotic at all to do it. Not all industrial leaders are like that, but. No, I think it's, we either get with the reality or we continue to suffer. And I think there's enough evidence now. It's not in question. We can see what's happening. And it's one of my main critiques of, some versions of Thatcherism, which is that the economic gains you thought you'd get from, what they call free trade are outweighed by the blood on the floor and looking after the towns in the Midlands and the North. It just isn't worth it when you end up with 20% of people out of work, and in the end, the town doesn't have the money to buy the goods.
I mean, look, this may be a bit of a rabbit hole, and I understand why you say what you do about Margaret Thatcher, but actually, a lot of what we're talking about was actually turbocharged in the years after her.
Deindustrialisation speeded up after Thatcher.
So I think Mrs. Thatcher was actually quite acutely aware of the importance of economic sovereignty.
Yeah.
And was aware of the importance of maintaining, a modern and competitive industrial base. I think it's in the years that followed. I mean, if you look, as I said, the trade deficit started really in 1998. The introduction of things like foreign private equity into the utilities and things like that happened in the Blair government. I think a lot of the sort of early ideas that were implemented under Mrs. Thatcher became much more radical, often in her name, than she ever was.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And Charles Moore was kind enough to do I was invited to do an interview with him for the European Conservative on the 100th anniversary and the reissue of the new Concisa book. And I think Charles took the point that I didn't doubt. I've never doubted her patriotism or many of her impulses, actually. I think I agree with that. But it's the unintended consequences and what happened after. I think that's right. We can't reindustrialize in this country. It's not even going to be possible unless we get our energy policy right. And the SDP spent a lot of effort and time in the last 6 months to produce, to write and research and produce a new energy paper, Energy Abundance. So, and it's an area of expertise for you. Where are we on energy? What chance do we have of rebuilding, from where we are? How would you go about it?
Well, on the basis of existing policy, we stand no chance whatsoever. And I mean, the full absurdity of what we do would blow people's minds if they understood the details.
I know. Yeah.
We are importing from Norway oil and gas drilled from the North Sea, the very same seabed that we could drill from.
Yeah.
But we refuse to do it because we want to say we're green and we're better than that.
40 billion.
Yeah. So the revenues and the jobs and the taxes and the contribution to the trade all go to Norway, which is obviously suicidal. Yeah. We are proposing to not just electrify and decarbonize much of our energy consumption within just a few years. To do that, you have to basically rebuild the entire national grid. It will cost billions and billions. Yeah. And if you think about not just the absurdity of what that means in energy terms, and you think about what that means in terms of the opportunity cost of where that investment could be going in the real economy, it's extraordinary. But according to the government's own figures, by 2030, we're going to be spending, I think it's £8 billion a year on what they call balancing costs, which is the amounts we will pay to stop solar and wind farms generating power when it's too sunny or too windy
in the system,
and then to turn on gas-fired power stations that are sort of mothballed when it's not sunny or windy enough. But it's completely unreliable.
I know, and no, I knew we'd agree about this. I mean, yet again, it's crazy. I tried to. I mean, when we did the paper, I had to sort of find a way of explaining to the public, because my job is to try and help people understand the position on it. And, in summary, I mean, particularly renewables, which are unreliable. So you have to have two systems, right? You have to have a proper system, which is reliable. And it might be an interconnector from France, unfortunately, but at least it's there when you need it. And renewables when they care to work.
So you just mentioned interconnectors, right? So the point about energy policy is we've got to have a supply of energy that is competitively priced, and we used to have among the most affordable industrial energy prices in the Western world. They're now the most expensive.
When the state used to do it.
Well,
CGB's record is great.
When we were intellectually honest about what we needed, and we were investing in gas and nuclear, then yes, we had the most competitively priced industrial energy around. Now we don't. It's the opposite. But there's also the question about security. And this is obviously vital. So what we're doing is making our energy supply less secure and more exposed at exactly the time that international terrorism remains a serious risk, but state-based threats are getting worse. So we're building wind turbines in the North Sea, and we know that the Russians are putting listening devices onto those turbines to help them to track the movement of our submarines. And remember, our nuclear deterrent is submarine-based. The wind turbines and solar panels are, they're likely in future to be Chinese manufactured, because the government's trying to do a deal with a Chinese firm called Mingyang. Solar is already often Chinese manufactured. Even when they're not Chinese manufactured, China dominates the world market in cellular internet modules, which means there are kill switches controlled by Beijing in pretty much all of these things. And then the interconnectors, upon which we rely more and more every year, where we get a supply in from the continent, are obviously vulnerable. So I think it was...
Well, the gas pipeline itself is vulnerable, obviously, because of what happened.
All of these things are vulnerable. Yeah. So I think it was on Christmas Day last year, a Russian ship destroyed an interconnector between Finland and Estonia. We know that it is part of the MO of Russia and China to do these things. And it was only a few weeks ago in the House of Commons that that a defense minister came to confirm that there was a Russian ship that we believed was mapping out cables and interconnectors in our waters. So we know that
used a laser apparently. Yeah.
Exactly at RAF pilots. That's true. So we know these things are serious threats, and we're making ourselves more and more exposed to them.
It almost, because I look at the situation sometimes and I think either you hate the country or it's like state capture in some way. I mean, what do you think? It's just incompetence, or ideology in the case of, I mean, in the net zero thing, it is ideology, isn't it? Driven by.
It is ideology, but I think a lot of what we're talking about, I think, is the fact that because of a series of decisions, many of which have been done for reasons of ideology, and we sometimes forget that liberalism is an ideology, and theories of free trade are based on ideological assumptions. Because of those decisions, we now find ourselves trapped in a variety of different ways. And whenever the Treasury has the upper hand inside Whitehall in discussing how to approach China, we walk further and further into that trap.
Yeah.
But they're doing it because they believe it's unavoidable and necessary, and quotes, we need the investment.
Yeah, but it's usually short-termism, because what we would have is some sort of George Brown style Department of Economic Affairs, and control it so you control it from investment point of view. So that has to dominate in it, and I find it. The best example I can find. The most inexplicable example I can find is post GFC in the coalition government, where it sat there, people call it austerity, trying to sort of rebalance things, salami slicing departments. But when you could borrow at 0.75% or below 1% on the 10-year gilt, didn't build any housing, didn't build any nuclear power. And I'm thinking, it's just asking you to do this. It's literally saying, please do this. And the yield on public sector housing is 3%, 2.5%, and it costs you not to do it. And obviously insane. And again, why couldn't we have, leaders that, nuclear power is incredibly frustrating because we started it.
We were world leaders in.
I know. And then you beg the Chinese and the French to do it for you when you could borrow it. I literally can't. It's one of these things I can't really understand. I find it very frustrating, which is why we wrote the report. But a lot of things came from the report, and I think, it's going to be, what the team did say, it's going to be very hard to reset. And that's why I talk about culture so much, because I can't think we can reset. You talk about investment a lot in your book, quite rightly, but I don't think you can reset. And I think it's incumbent on all politicians to tell the public there's going to be some pain involved in resetting. It was like the welfare bill getting totally out of control. You have to have a reset. I'm sorry, you can't invest if you go on like that. And it's just going to have to be the way. Another really big thing that we must talk about is borders and immigration, which is, again, it's another thing that's probably had a vibe shift. You talk about the vibe shift in trade. We're on social media, and you shouldn't spend too much time on social media, but there has been a vibe shift in this topic. And even some sort of normie sort of liberals are starting to say, yeah, perhaps immigration is a bit high, more in common. 72% of people think it's too high. But let's start on the sort of proximate, real sort of, it's not the biggest in numbers, but it's the biggest breach, which is just you allow people just to wander in and invade your south coast, and no government's been able to solve it. What are we going to do about this, Nick? What are we going to do?
Well, no government has been able to solve it because successive governments have willed the ends but not the means. And in the end, I think the only way you can stop something like this is if you make it absolutely clear to the people who would cross the channel that if they do that, they will never, ever get to stay here. they will either be intercepted straight away or as soon as they land on our coastline, they will be taken somewhere else. And ultimately, I think that means they would have to be deported to their own country, or if for whatever reason that is not possible, to a third country. That's how Australia fixed the problem.
Yeah.
That's how we will end up fixing the problem, because in the end, I don't think...
Do you think it will be fixed?
Well, in the end, there will be no option, because the country will not tolerate governments continuing to allow this to happen. And governments eventually will have to accept there is probably only one way to do this.
But because you have long experience in the Home Office and at Number 10, that Mahmood's, the rhetoric is very good. But if you look at the detail, that's not going to solve it. It's not going to solve it. I know it's not going to. So then you're into another thing, because we've had slogans, the Rwanda scheme and stop the boat, smash the gangs slogans. During the election last year, I knew there's no chance of them solving this with that slogan and all that. And I look at it's a little bit tighter, but there's nothing short of what we know needs to happen, which is you have to disincorporate the international legal architecture, which prevents you from taking national action. And it just has to happen. That's the 5167 and the ECHR, and change our own domestic acts, HRA, etc. And then you have to have a facility in Ascension, something you control, not something you outsource. It doesn't have to have high capacity, because I don't believe it would ever be used in high capacity if you picked every single person up and gave them 2 years punitive detention for unsolicited arrival, and then you go somewhere else and it would stop. People aren't stupid. Do you agree?
I completely agree. And that's exactly what the story was in Australia. Yeah. So Australia continues to pay Nauru, this tiny Pacific state, what is to Nauru, a vast sum of money, in order for anybody who makes it to the Australian shoreline and claim asylum, in order for Nauru to take those people and allow them to claim asylum there. And guess what? When people realise they're not claiming asylum in Australia, they're claiming it in Nauru, nobody tries it.
Nobody tries it,
So Nauru continues to receive the funds. It's there as a backstop, but it's working, and it's not actually operational anymore because it's succeeded.
It's one of these things that, I've done mainly on Mike Graham's show. Mike Graham's been on the naughty step. He's been taken off Talk TV, but I've talked about it for years. And the incentives, it's basic incentives. People aren't daft. Look at it from the other side. I've always defended the rationale of the illegal migrant, in that it's perfectly rational.
Why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they? It's 5,000 euros, and you get in, and family reunion, you get a whole family in the end. And then we're stuck. So, there's another thing. We're going to have to find something.
And every single person who crosses the channel over the course of their lifetimes will, according to the research, cost an average of £400,000 net to the taxpayer.
Yeah, and people don't know this. So this is another thing that you can help sort of try and push things along by making people realise, because of course the broader rhetoric, we talk about legal migration in a second, but the broader rhetoric is that diversity is our strength, and that immigrants built the state. Apparently, forget the Irish labourers.
These things are lies, right?
They're total lies.
Yeah. The people who built Britain are the people who have lived in Britain through its history. Yeah. Actually, that does include Irish people, but obviously the Irish people who came to what we now call Britain were part of Great Britain at the time.
Of course.
As the United Kingdom at the time. And that's not to disparage people who have made their lives here over the last, getting on for 100 years. But obviously it's not true that Britain was only built in the last,
so there's nothing 7
or 8 decades or something. And it's also a lie to say diversity is just simply a strength. No. It's not. It's a challenge that needs to be overcome. And all the research by very serious academics, including people on the left like Robert Putnam, shows I think what actually most people intuitively feel, which is it shows that radical diversity undermines social trust and a sense of solidarity. And when you have less solidarity, you obviously have less willingness to, go along with the give and take that that, a modern and civilized society needs, whether that's about paying your taxes, or, the small acts of politeness on the street, or, the bravery it takes to stand up to somebody committing a crime or some antisocial behavior or whatever. It all falls away. So we have a massive challenge on our hands. And in some ways, I think the country has done it reasonably well. In some ways, I think we've done it catastrophically terribly. But we have a massive challenge on our hands to try to regain the coherence that we need to be a successful country.
So one of the, you mentioned Putnam. Putnam's he did the research, this American sociologist, and he proved, he demonstrated in his research that social trust does fall. It's more challenging in diverse societies. But one of the things that I think we'd be better off if we had policy that was at least evidence-based. It's funny, progressives used to go on about evidence-based policy. It used to be a thing. But on this particular topic, you mentioned the ONS figures there. The first bit of good research I saw was Van der Beek's study, the Amsterdam, the Dutch study on, and they had different categories of migration. And, my wife's an immigrant. There's good immigration. A lot of my family are immigrants from various places, but a state ought to try and look after its citizens, and that, for me, implies that you try and have fiscally positive migration, skilled migration, something that you need, something that will help your society. Those are basics, right?
Well, and yes, and I think if you're talking about a policy that is going to change the kind of country you are in a permanent way, then you need to understand what it is you're doing. And that's true fiscally, it's true culturally, of course. But on the fiscal question, everyone deliberately, I think, just puts their head in the sand. So in Denmark, the Danish finance ministry publishes regular data on the fiscal contribution of different profiles of migrants. And broadly speaking, what it shows is Danish citizens are by far the biggest net contributors and make a positive fiscal contribution, I think, pretty much all the way through their lives until their pensions. European migrants are next down. Then there's a kind of general category which I think is broadly neutral, maybe a little negative over the course of a lifetime. Then they have a category called MENAT, which stands for the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey. And that category is fiscally negative at every stage.
Well, it starts
of the average migrant's life, which is obviously actually quite curious, given that as we're in our sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, those are the years where we should be contributing the most. But this research shows that even then, the average migrant from that profile is fiscally negative. And I've asked the Home Secretary, given that the Home Office has been saying, well, we're fans of the Danish model now. I said, well, will you do what the Danes do in terms of understanding this data and publishing it? And she said she doesn't want to get into dividing migrants and judging them by nationality in that way. I'd say that's absolutely fundamental to a sensible system.
And what I always argue when they say that is that you can't advance evidence-based policy without the evidence. Sorry. We're not, in a sense, we're not actually asking for very much. We're just asking to know. I think you've got a duty to your citizens. I'd say, I started talking about this a few years ago, and I gave that Van der Beek report to Matt Goodwin, actually, a few people. No one was talking about it. It's not an unreasonable assumption to imagine that in a quick day in the summer, when you get 1,000 people coming over, unsolicited across from France, which is obviously a terrible country. You need to escape. You need to escape the coffee and all the rest of it. So 1,000 people, it's not unreasonable. It's going to be something like £500,000 a head. And we can't balance our budget now. And I just think this is an absolute emergency. It's an absolute catastrophe. Having said that, the data on, if you're going to have legal migration, skilled migration, that's low skilled, I think it's slightly unfair to not make the point that that category of migration will be fiscally negative anyway, probably, because you don't. In our system, you have to get to something like the 57th percentile to get a fiscally positive. So if you're going to have that category, it begs the question: do you need to? what are you going to do if you don't do that? So I always flag that up because people say, well, it's disastrous. Also, well, yeah, but you've got people working in East Anglia in poultry factories, and that's low skilled migration, or some of it's high school, but it's a point. Can I just, on the, what I would call the hard right, particularly amongst the young, something's happened which is understandable but concerning, which is people are starting to say deport, remigrate. So remigration and deportation is now a thing in public discourse, and it wasn't before. Now I find it quite easy because I'm sort of trying to be a simple second-rate philosopher about it, and say that if you're here illegally, you've got to be deported, even if it's 1 million people. So Rupert Lowe, I've backed, the basically report and Harrison Pitt. I think they're basically right. I can't argue it. If I was Lee Kuan Yew, I wouldn't argue it. If you're illegal, you should be deported. I think that's basics. And if you don't say that, as a politician, you have to decide what other laws you want to say. I just can't be bothered to bother with. But do you think there is a sort of more wider and less well-defined general vibe about remigration that is not well thought out?
Well, you just have to break these things down, I think. I mean, obviously, future immigration, the flow of people coming in the future needs to be radically cut. It's got, we've just got to get the numbers down to the barest possible minimum. The country needs a breather. It's just been too much. And we're in a crisis. In a variety of ways, economic, social, cultural, yes. Then there's the question of anybody who's come into the country illegally. And my personal view is whether you're talking about future migrants coming in illegally when policy has hopefully reached a sensible point, or whether you're talking about the people who have come here illegally in the past, those people should go. There should be no reward for coming into the country illegally.
No.
Then there's the category of people who have come here legally on time-limited visas over recent years. Because somehow the debate about immigration has almost been conducted under the assumption that if somebody comes on a time-limited visa, they get to stay forever, which is crackers. I mean, that's just not the deal at all, and not the deal that anybody who's been given a visa was ever offered. So there is a moment now where, having said that the rate of immigration in recent years has been far too high, where we can say to people, we can undo some of this damage because we can say, it's not your fault, but you were given a visa that lasted for this many years, and we're not going to renew it, and you will need to leave.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I can't argue. A state has to have the right to make some policy, and if you're there on 5 years, 10 years, whatever the terms are, and it expires, the state has the right to say, thank you very much, but you have to go back. The grayer areas are ILR indefinitely to remain. You see, what's your view on that?
Well, so I was coming to that. So I think, firstly, the government has said they want to reform settlement rules, indefinite leave to remain. And, we're back a bit to their sort of tougher sounding rhetoric, but slightly more nuanced policy, where, they have said that in some cases, it should take longer, to get ILR. Now, I think some of that just doesn't really make very much sense because, and I've asked this question in the House, and I haven't had a very satisfactory answer, but they're saying that actually if somebody has the profile that suggests that they are going to become a fiscal dependent in the future, then they're going to extend the qualifying period for indefinite leave to remain to 15 years. To which I say, well, why are you offering them indefinite leave to remain at all? Why don't you say we know you're going to become a cost to us? You need to leave at the end of your visa. You're not going to get a route to settlement. Because that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think that their position, I think, is weaker than the headlines have suggested. I mean, it seems to me that settlement should be much tougher. That we have this moment to try to undo some of the damage that's been done in recent years, and that for some people who have been given settlement, if they've broken the law, they should have it revoked.
That breaches the deal. I agree. I think you can't have all of the obligations on one side. If you come from another place and you're given a certain status, and you end up being a criminal, again, I think that's the end of it. These are detailed. I mean, there are so many different schemes and so many different categories of migration, legal migration. It gets actually very complicated. But something that isn't very complicated is that Britain, like a lot of large and small European countries now, has very large, what we could fairly describe as unassimilated minorities, very, very large. And I want to ask you, because again, it's something that I just try to find out. I'd sooner argue with the evidence. And I managed to get Garrett Jones over, who wrote the Culture Transplant.
It's a brilliant book.
Brilliant book. And he came over especially, actually, I interviewed him a few years ago when it came out. And the first chapter is Assimilation is a Myth. And of course, it's something that there is integration, there's association, and there's adaptation, and there's reverse immigration. I mean, a population comes and it affects the host population. But a lot of people, do you agree that a lot of people bandy around assumptions about assimilation, which is not actually grounded in the real world?
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why we need immigration right now to go to the lowest possible level, because the job in front of us is enormous, because I don't think we've yet seen a country that has successfully integrated lots of newcomers without question. Now, you could say, well, America's done that, but America's a very different place. I mean, America genuinely is a country of immigrants. Britain, despite what is often said on the left, is not a country of immigrants. And Garrett Jones has this line in his book, and this is all obviously backed with serious research and evidence, where he says, immigrants make their new countries a lot like their old ones.
They do.
And I'm afraid that is, that there is truth in that.
There is, but it's not, and also, joking aside, if you looked at 1920s Melbourne, it's a Anglo-Western settler civilization. It's very much us. I mean, people don't. The idea is another thing. I would almost argue that it's unreasonable. You have a large immigrant bloc, and this. Let's cut to the chase. The reason it's difficult is that some of these groups are highly culturally similar to us, with antagonistic. Some of them, minorities, some of them, but significant minorities are antagonistic to Western values anyway. So what I would try and start. I would try and start public debate. Which is, what is the case? Do you expect people to shed their religious opinions, their cultural beliefs, their backgrounds, their practices on arriving somewhere? And they're not. And so that's the challenge for the hello clouds, hello sky progressives. What do they expect to happen? What do you think they expect?
Well, look, there's all sorts of angles to this. I'm not sure I even know what they expect to happen. But one of the angles is about clan identities. So Western Europe, Britain in particular, changed the nature of its society kind of organically hundreds of years ago,
1300s,
where we broke away from clan identities and moved to sort of nuclear families, much more mobile. People married who they chose. And that made our society much more sort of fluid. And that was one of the, I think, contributory factors behind the emergence of our liberal democracy. Now, it is undeniably true that with some of the waves of migration that we've had, we've now imported clan identities. Which challenge a lot of the assumptions about individual freedom, about the rule of law, about corruption,
taxation
within businesses, and about loyalty. Loyalty is an unfashionable word, isn't it? But it's an important one. Now, when George Galloway ran for Parliament, I think it was in his Bethnal Green campaign, his first public meeting, so maybe not public meetings, sorry, his first meetings were not in the constituency. He flew to Bangladesh
Interesting.
To meet elders in Bangladesh, because he knew that if he won their approval, he would win in the constituency back in Britain.
Yeah.
And that, that tells its own story, doesn't it, about clan identities. And when we've worried about things like the inspection reports into the way Lutfur Rahman operated when he was investigated and I think barred from public office for a period, it's connected to all of these questions. And that undeniably changes the nature of certainly local communities and local units of government organisation, whether that's councils or police forces or whatever.
But it's not. My big point is it's sort of clunking reality. It's not going to change. I mean, you're not going to. You have to try and deal with what is the case. So if people have high in group solidarity and clannish systems, you don't expect it to your sort of soft liberal secular state to impact on them and say, yeah, no, we're going to start behaving like you, because people don't. People don't, and all the evidence is that they don't. So I would say, for policymakers, they have to do something which is quite difficult, but they have to look at the evidence and they have to ask themselves, in the West particularly, and this is why we started off on this American report. And Trump, I've been on record, I'm not sure I'd vote for Trump. I like Vance actually, but Trump's right about a lot of stuff, and he is able to say it. And I think this is existential for Europe, because none of the elites are dealing with it. And the first line is to say, face reality. Some of these dissimilar minorities are not integrated, can't assimilate, are getting bigger, are antagonistic to Western values. So stop making it worse, which is exactly what you're talking about, is to have an immigration policy which is end mass immigration.
But there's also questions about social policy, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So it is a problem for Europe, but I think it's a particular problem for Britain, because the way we've always organised our politics, our government, our kind of collective life has been through a very hands-off, light-touch liberalism. That's depended on things where I'm not sure it's necessarily true anymore. Right? So very clear shared identities, very high levels of trust. There's this brilliant quote from Edmund Burke about how we need moral chains, to limit our own appetites, and that the less restraint there is within us, the more restraint there has to be imposed on us. And in a high trust society, in a very cohesive society, you can rely on people to restrain themselves. But when that trust disappears, actually, you do need a stronger state to impose order.
Well, that's what you're saying,
and to police boundaries.
Yeah, but but it's uncomfortable, because it's a point John Gray has made a lot, which is the loss of the common life implies a common culture. As you say, people make accommodations day to day. They barely need policing in that sense. And Gray is yet another turn. It is a turn towards a more Hobbesian view of what the state should do. But it's very uncomfortable for us, because you get into asymmetric policing and two-tier policing, and a lot of people feel, do you agree, as a lot of people have talked about it, do you agree that the state is bearing down on white majorities that are upset about some of these things to a greater extent and a disproportionate extent to other people?
I think it is undeniable that there are many examples of decisions made by the police and in the criminal justice system that feel and seem to be different when you take a case involving somebody of one particular identity or one particular political belief and another. I am at the moment, I am working to expose the decision making of the police that led to the ban on Israeli supporters coming to Villa Park for a Europa League match.
Can you just tell, in case people haven't, because I followed it and I looked at your great little film on it. Can you tell us about that? Because we can use that as an example. So what happened? Villa were playing.
So I know quite a bit about the context of this because I'm an Aston Villa supporter. I actually went to school a short walk away from the ground. I know the area quite well. I haven't lived there for more than a quarter of a century, but I know it all quite well. And as soon as Villa drew Maccabi Tel Aviv in the Europa League, you knew there was going to be a big problem because Aston is almost entirely a Muslim area, and the local MP.
It was when I lived. I lived in Handsworth.
Yeah,
it was pretty. Handsworth a bit more mixed, but Aston was very Pakistani.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the local MP is one of these so-called Gaza independents.
Yes,
and he and other politicians and others in the area started a petition to ban the game altogether. Like no Israeli should be allowed to come. And he actually said in the preamble to his petition, it said one of the reasons was this is a predominantly Muslim area. That's a quote. And the game did go ahead, but the Safety Advisory Group, which is this kind of opaque committee of the,
and is that the
local
council?
Well, it's chaired by the council. But its membership isn't even totally clear. It has councillors on it. The Safety Advisory Group said, for safety reasons, the away fans should not be allowed to come. And this is, not something that's ever happened in my years of supporting Villa.
And also, can I just to make it absolutely clear, because Maccabi Tel Aviv, every football club has, some ultras, but I've followed, actually, my second team, which is Newcastle United, all over Europe. Some very hostile places. Ferencváros was the worst. Budapest, very challenging. But Rotterdam, challenging. A lot of this is normal, right? And I didn't think, as far as I knew, that Maccabi Tel Aviv had a particular problem with football hooliganism. Is that right?
It seems clear to me that in response to the demands of Islamists, the police decided to fit the facts, to reach a predetermined decision, to ban the Israeli fans from coming because they were Israeli, and to claim that public safety was the reason, and to pin the blame on Israeli supporters rather than the kind of Islamist agitators and others. And the basis upon which they did this was information they said they got from the Dutch police after Maccabi played Ajax last year, when there was trouble in Amsterdam. But lots of people will remember this from the time because it was an international news story. The story at the time was that local extremists and thugs were hunting down Israelis and Jews. And by the way, it was the anniversary of Kristallnacht in Amsterdam. And it was called in the international media a Jew hunt. The King of the Netherlands apologized. The mayor of Amsterdam apologized. West Midlands Police claim in their intelligence report, which I assume they never thought was going to be published, but I got my hands on a copy and I've published it. They basically say, well, these Israeli supporters are uniquely violent, that they're linked to the Israeli Defense Force.
But that's why
the Dutch police had told them that they were going into Muslim areas to attack civilians, that they threw people into the river, that the police needed 5,000 officers to quell the trouble. And the Dutch police have said on the record, none of this is true. They needed 1,200 officers, and actually the reason they needed so many was because actually it was Kristallnacht, there was a vigil, there was a Palestine march, there was the football match, there was another football match involving, I think, Turkish fans nearby. The only incident where anybody was thrown into the river was an Israeli fan who was told he wouldn't be allowed back out unless he shouted "Free Palestine."
Right.
that the people who were hurt were mostly Israeli supporters.
Yeah.
And so it seems that the police case for the ban was fabricated. They went to the Home Affairs Select Committee last week and have had to apologise for the evidence they've given since because it wasn't true.
Yeah.
And it seems pretty clear to me that they did that because they feared disorder that would have started in the local area.
But that's what irritated me about it. I mean, people that haven't shown particular interest in Aston Villa or its games suddenly take an interest in it.
No, well, I think Villa fans were massively offended because some of these guys stood outside Villa Park and wore Villa shirts and claimed they were doing it in the name of Villa and Villa fans. Actually, I think some of these guys, the internet never. Well, I was going to say the internet never lies. That's not true. But there's always something online somewhere, and people. People dug out the histories of these guys, and they were shown to be supporting other clubs anyway. But they basically corrupted a very important local institution, the football club, in order to make this kind of communalist, political, and potentially violent point.
It's failure it's failure of the centre to hold and to set the cultural tone. There's no attempt to say sorry. No, we're going to have this. It's going to go ahead. There's no reason. Certainly, I thought the claims were absurd that these were particularly troublesome.
I'm sure there are some ultras who.
I'm sure they're in every club, but you
behave very badly.
But you haven't been. If you've been to football matches in Italy and other places, there is trouble.
Well, if you take Villa in Europe in recent years. We've played Legia Warsaw. We've played Bologna. We recently played Young Boys of Bern from Switzerland. Young Boys ended up ripping up seats in the away end and throwing things at players on the pitch.
Yeah,
Daniel Marlon was was hit on the head and was bleeding. And they have a track record of behaving like that, and apparently that was classed as a medium risk game.
Medium risk, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it's treated very differently, and it seems pretty clear the reason it was treated differently was the Maccabi are from Israel.
Yeah, of course, yeah. It does play into, I mean, I know you've commented a lot about the attempts to create a sort of Islamophobia law, and would you like to just say a few things about that, because you've worked on that?
Well, this is another example of what we're talking about, right? I mean, who'd have thought even 10 years ago there would be a live debate about anything to do with blasphemy in this country? But I think the problem has been there for a long time. I mean, there is an issue about free speech and Islam. I mean, in this country, but pretty much everywhere. And the first time we saw it in this country was with satanic verses in the 80s. But it's reared its head at different points, like with the Batley teacher who remains in hiding with his family and has a new identity.
It's rarely raised in public
discourse. It's disgraceful. And our ability to talk about religious ideas really matters, right? So for example, there was an attack on the synagogue in Manchester at Heaton Park. I think that was the beginning of October. Now, you can say that's not Islam. The perpetrator felt he was doing it in the name of Islam.
Yeah,
Islamism is not Islam, but it is of Islam, and Islamists do what they do in the name of Islam. And we need to be able to talk about the ideas that lead people like that to act as they do. And there's an hadith, which is one of the sayings of Muhammad. I mean, actually, lots of these sayings are disputed by scholars, but there's one of the hadiths says, "Judgment Day will not come until the trees and the rocks." It's a bit strange. Start talking and say, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew behind me. You must kill him." Which lots of people interpret to be an instruction for Muslims to kill Jews.
It could be.
And we need to talk about these things, not least because there are lots of Islamic scholars who say this is not authentic and Muslims shouldn't believe it.
But some do. It's a population level problem. If some... So obviously those ideas need to be interrogated and debated. And
An Islamophobia definition is a deliberate attempt to shut down and to control what we can and can't say about religious ideas, but also about the conduct of Muslims in certain circumstances. So the definition that was produced by the all-party group of Islamophobia in 2018, which was endorsed by all the people who were involved in producing a new definition for the government now, explicitly said that discussion of the rape gangs is an example of Islamophobic discourse. That identifying entryism into governmental and societal organisations is an example of Islamophobia, even though we know that's what the Muslim Brotherhood's MO is. And lots of things like that. And they're deliberately aligning the protection of people from real harm with the protection of ideas from scrutiny and criticism. Well, that's the aim. Yeah,
they don't want you to talk about it. And that's on the rape gangs. That's why we got into the trouble we've got into, because people couldn't deal with it it was partly a racist crime. It's probably, on the numbers, probably the biggest single racially targeted crime in post-war Europe, probably something like that. We're not inclined to want to admit that, and the reason it happened was probably partly because of these reasons. What I'm after is a state that can try to set the cultural tone. I mean, I think you talk about the detail of a law of Islamophobia. If you breach it and you get a strong Hobbesian state saying, "Sorry, I'm going to lock you up for saying this," that's a problem. But I would say de facto, you've got a blasphemy law anyway because of Batley and Wakefield, and cinemas.
There's lots of levels, right?
Yeah,
people are silenced because of fear of violence and fear of direct action. So cinemas, closed down. They stopped showing the Lady of Heaven movie because that was deemed blasphemous.
Yeah.
You have the Islamophobia definition, which won't be a law, but will end up having some kind of legal effect because these definitions end up being used by the judiciary and the police and others. But there's also the misuse of the Public Order Act. So there have been 2 people this year who have been arrested and charged for desecrating the Quran and saying things that were offensive to Muslims. Obviously, burning somebody's religious text is not a nice thing to do. But it's not illegal.
No, in fact, we talked about it here on a different thing. I agree with you. I think that obviously wrong to do this, and but it is illegal. Different.
But the authorities are determined to stick with it. So in the case of Hamit Choskan, he's a Turk, and he was protesting outside the Turkish consulate, burned the Quran. Shouted some things. 2 different passers-by came and attacked him. One went off and got a knife and then attacked him very violently, was shouting, "I'm going to kill you."
Yeah.
In Choskan's original hearing, the judge said that you were attacked by 2 different people is evidence that your behaviour was disorderly and therefore you're guilty. Which I think is insane. He then appealed that. He won his appeal, and the judge was incredibly clear,
very clear,
and said, if the right to free speech means anything, it means the right to offend. We don't have blasphemy laws in this country. Excellent. I wrote to the head of the College of Policing and the director of public prosecutions after that and said, will you change your guidance to make clear, in light of this ruling, that people shouldn't be prosecuted for offending people's religious beliefs? And the DPP wrote back saying, no, because I'm going to appeal this.
Yeah.
And if you think about some of the cases where lots of right-thinking people would have said, the law's an ass, or that ruling's wrong, or whatever it is, and the CPS hasn't appealed, they seem absolutely determined to be able to use the Public Order Act to shut down this kind of protest.
But the slightly depressing thing is that the long-term logical consequences of having lots of different culturally dissimilar and partly antagonistic groups in the same domain is that you will have very, very heavy policing and control.
Yes, and
by the state, which it just doesn't treat citizens on a par.
Well,
it really doesn't.
So one vision of the future is that the state needs to be very aggressive in policing the boundaries between different groups of ethnic identities, religious identities, and so on. Now, I think that's grim. I don't want that. I want us to be free to say the things we believe, to be able to inquire freely, study freely,
but that
critique things as we deem appropriate ourselves, without the law telling us what we can and can't think or say.
And
if we go down that route, Britain will not be Britain.
No, it won't be. No, and it has no chance of being so unless you're prepared to set the cultural tone and say, in this secular state, this is the way someone go in a pub and speak the truth. This is what we have, very high embedded rights culturally. Shouldn't take them for granted. And if you arrive here, you're going to have to live that way. And that, unless we do that, but I see it all going in the wrong direction. I think it's much more micro policing and the rest of it. Can we finish on a sort of general, political outlook thing? We obviously are in turbulent times, economically, socially, politically, and it all reflects it. And you've got your party in a sort of rebuild position now.
The Conservative Party, not your party.
Not your party. No, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, so I've got to watch what I say now. Yeah, the Conservative Party in a sort of rebuild, and actually, history says, unless we're in a different paradigm, which we may well be, but history says that you first past the post system, the party that's been knocked down recovers, but you have a new challenger party, which is Reform, which is doing very well in the polls. But I always remind people that, the SDP in the 80s got polled at 52% and 82 and ended up getting 25. So it's all up for grabs. And you have a lot of movement on the left. And what I slightly worry about, I think it is, the country is in a crisis. I know I'm on the economic left, but I think all of us need before 2029 to assemble some sort of patriotic, economic nationalist and culturally nationalist force. And if we don't, there's a very big risk that between the SNP and Plaid and your party and, the Greens and the Lib Dems and what's left of the Labour Party, because then they will be smashed, there could be some dreadful sort of progressive coalition that would just extend the pain. Do you think that's a risk?
I think all of these shocks in the party political system are symptoms of the fact that the political system has failed the country. Everyone knows that we have these crises that we started off talking about, economic, cultural, and in the quality of our government itself. And the parties have not been up to the challenge. To be frank, after what we did with immigration between 2019 and 2024, the Conservative Party was lucky to survive. And the Labour Party was elected after a long period in opposition when they had the opportunity to think very deeply and to make serious plans. They were elected with, promises and rhetoric and no idea of what they were going to do. So it doesn't seem surprising to me that the two main parties are polling at combined their lowest ever level. And as a Conservative, who strongly believes in, the philosophy of conservatism, and who feels very patriotically about our country, I think we spent a lot of times, a lot of column inches devoted to, this party, that party, deals, what it means for the electoral system, and so on and so on. We only have one job. It's a massive job, but our job is to fully understand why we were rejected, fully understand why we failed to do the things that the country needed in that last term in office, and to really, really understand and interrogate the challenges, massive challenges that the country faces, and to show that our ideas and our policies match the size of those challenges, and that we can be the people who genuinely can rescue the country, because it needs rescuing.
It does, but so just the final thing. Do you believe that we still have a majority that is culturally patriotic and is prepared to accept this? I mean, one of my criticisms.
Yeah, I do.
I think we do as well,
do.
And that's the optimistic side. I really do. I don't think Parliament reflects the divides in the country very well, and Brexit showed that actually. But I think it's there to be convened, and I think we should be optimistic about that.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, I spent a lot of time doing public meetings, village halls, knocking on doors, talking to people in the cold, letting the cold into the house, annoying them. And when you spend time doing that, you cannot escape the very profound, common sense, reasonable, patriotic, responsible mentality that actually the overwhelming majority of the people of this country have.
I agree. So, you row your boat and I'll row mine, and we'll see where we get. Thanks very much. Been great
Thanks for
speaking to you. Thank you. Cheers.